welcome back to Sunrise Daily. We turn our attention back to where we started off. It's got to do with education. Yes, World Teachers Day, just a good time to bring that back in. We're joined now by Professor Patience Akpan-Obong, who is the political scientist in Arizona State University, and she's now a Fulbright scholar here in Nigeria. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
We're talking about education and looking at the kind of system that exists here and what we need to do, particularly for the teachers. You're one.
Yes,
at a different level.
Very proudly so.
What do you see going on, and what strikes you in terms of what we need to do to make that profession attractive to almost everyone?
Well, first of all, I was kind of fascinated yesterday, World Teachers Day, and it was interesting to see that schools closed so teachers could go to the stadium and, and really celebrate, and as well they should. But I was also thinking about the way World Teachers Day celebrated elsewhere. Teachers stay in the classroom and parents and students, take gifts, it's called a Teacher Appreciation Week and all of that to them, which brings me to an important point, the lack of involvement of the community in schools. Parents are not involved, and in the past, parents used to be involved in education. So that's one aspect of it. Parents need to be involved. Parents need to know what their kids are learning in school. Parents also need to, like every now and then, not just the PTA meetings, every now and then go into the classrooms to sit with their students, with their children, and understand what it is that they are learning. So that way they can partner with them at home in the learning process. So that's one aspect of it, the involvement of parents. But I look at the educational system here and I get really depressed. Obviously I went to school here, primary school, secondary school, etc. And I remember how things were then. By the time we finished secondary school, we could at least know a few things about life. But now there's so much decay. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying that in hopefully a constructive way. We need to go back to the basics, to the foundation, the primary school system, the secondary school system. Those are the things that we really need to focus on. As I always say, after secondary school, we really don't learn anything anymore. We may go to the university or wherever and learn specific areas. I'm a political scientist. I probably know a whole lot about political science, but I don't know anything about chemistry, engineering. What I know about chemistry is what I learned in the secondary school. So we need to pay particular attention to those foundational levels. Primary school. Our primary schools need to be well-funded, well-facilitated. And then there's also another thing. I know yesterday was World Teachers Day, so everybody's focusing on, how to make teachers better, the welfare package, the salaries, and to get teachers motivated. But we also need to look at another aspect. What we are doing now, those who have money send their kids to well-funded, furnished schools and all of that, and those who don't have money go to public schools. I keep thinking, what's Nigeria going to be like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when you have these two classes of people, those who went to the public schools, where in many cases they don't have desks, they don't have chairs, they sit on the floor. And then there's this other class of kids who go to schools where it's like they've got everything. They've got laundry, they've got computers, they've got all the luxury that they can get. And they're also learning because the teachers there are well paid and hopefully more motivated. And they're learning a whole lot of things that those other students are not learning. 20 years from now, they are going to be part of this society. They're going to be our leaders. In the past, education used to be the channel through which a poor kid could rise, social mobility and all of that. But if today's poor kids are still in the poor environment, going to school and finishing secondary school and hardly able to read or write. And this is, I'm not just making this up. I mean, as a teacher and coming back and forth in Nigeria, I've seen a whole lot of kids who have finished schools and don't have any skills, any reading, the basic skills. Then there's also another thing. I think we need to focus on the humanities. We need to focus on the art, because for me, that's like comprehensive education. That's whole person education. Again, going back to my own experience, when I was in primary school, we read E.N. Amaku, which is a series of Efik language literature. And that series had a whole lot about courage, about, bravery, about heroism, all kinds of things. I have never read any E.N. Amaku since I left primary school. In secondary school, I read Shakespeare. I have never been in a position where Shakespeare was assigned to me, but I got a lot out of that. So we need to focus on the humanities, because that's where I think we learn style, we learn culture, we learn class, we learn a whole lot of things that we may not learn when we continue on to tertiary institutions. And then secondly, we also need to teach skills. By the time a kid finishes secondary school, he or she should be able to have one art, one skill, one craft work, either hairdressing or dressmaking or barber or whatever. Everybody should leave school with something in his or her hands that he or she can do. And so that if you don't have a job, or you're waiting for 7 years to pass through JAM and get into the tertiary institution, at least you can do something with your hands. And so we need to shift our focus from the kind of education that we have now to a new model of education, one focused on the foundational levels, primary and secondary school. And secondly, teach whole person kind of education. So you come out and be a well-rounded, educated person, not just somebody who knows one or two things about one or two specific areas.
Allow me to
and then thirdly, every child who finishes secondary school at least should have one skill, one useful and usable skill.
That's why I wanted to come in, because it would seem as if we had tried this model before. We had the 6334 to the extent that we had it on paper that introductory technology was brought in. A lot of people were learning carpentry, plumbing, and so many other things, to the extent that we thought that it was education for self-reliance. If you wanted to opt out after high school, you could do one or two things. But we didn't even quite get a grip of that particular program.
Maybe because we didn't do it perfectly. It's one thing to say, okay, you learn carpentry, and then they hire a teacher who shows you how to put the nails and the hammer and all of that, put things together. And that teacher is also teaching a whole lot of other classes. And so maybe you have just 1 hour every week to learn that. And then you pass, and then you go on, you've taken that course. What I'm thinking of is a situation where you actually, look at the young people who learn trade, they go apprentice as dressmakers, as hairdressers, and all of that. It's not just 1 hour a week thing. It's something that is part of it. So the point I'm making is that if probably at the end of JS3, when the kid goes on to SS1, he or she should choose one art. And then at the end of the 3-year program, that person should have a project that showcases what he or she learned in the 3 years. So it's not just a 1 semester thing or a 1 year thing. It should be a 3-year project. Just like you go, you do your PhD, you start, you have your proposal, dissertation, and all of that. So you spend 2 to 3 years working on that single project. So I would think if we did it that way, where kids SS1, you pick up one craft. If you want to do carpentry, you pick that up, and then you sustain it for the 3 years, even as you're also doing the other subjects. So that way, when you finish, you actually have something that you can do. In secondary school, I learned needlework, which dressmaking. Back in my day, we called it needlework. But it was just enough for me to pass. It wasn't enough for me to make any clothes. So I had whatever the grade was back then in needlework, so I passed it, I did it. But I still, even today, I can't do my own, can't sew my buttons on. So that wasn't useful, even though it was on paper, I did need to work.
Speaking about which, pardon me, Mark, I mean, you talk about what you learned at that time, and it kept on changing, because then you also had the federal government colleges, wherein they also had technical drawing, they had agricultural science, they used to go to the orchard, they had the integrated science, they had chemistry, they went to the lab, so things that they did with their hands, many remember. Okay. But these days, it looks as though those unity schools virtually collapsed. What should we do? Because the model in where you teach in US, I mean, the education is in the purview of the states. So what should we do? Should we have that kind of model, or should we leave it all as it is now?
Well, I mean, we can always improve, and in this situation, a lot of improvement is needed. I don't really think the federal government should be that involved in schools, like running schools. Like the unity schools were good models, but the unity schools can be replicated at different levels.
It doesn't seem to be working.
No, it's not working anymore, because now the private schools have taken over. Again, back to what I said earlier, where you have these two classes of children now growing up, those whose families can afford or can borrow or can whatever, to pay $1 million plus to send them to school. And those other kids who go to public schools, even in states where technically it's free education, I know of situations where parents of children can't even afford to buy the uniform for them to go to school. And in those places, it's free education, but the facilities are not there in school. And so I think we need to focus on education, but I don't think the federal government should be in the business of funding schools. And even at the universities, I think my colleagues will be upset with me for saying that. But the federal government should not be. The federal government should have policies that guard and guide the way schools run, but federal government should not be having unity schools. States and local government areas, local government should be in charge of schools, which also brings me to another point. Local government should be in charge of schools, and they should be not just in charge by waiting for money from the federal government, but in charge by also using their own internally generated revenue.
But that will happen, don't you think, if we also revisit our federalism?
Exactly. That's the point I was going to make. Exactly. So we need to, if we are going to run a federal system, we need to do it really well. We are not doing it well, which is why we are having a whole lot of problems, because local governments should be in charge of schools, primary schools, secondary schools, and not just about paying teachers' salaries. I know that right now, primary school teachers are under the purview of local government. But it should go beyond that. It should go beyond just passing the check to them. It should go to the point of where the local government are actually running the schools in cooperation with the community, with parents.